Hey everyone, so it's almost 2 weeks into June, so I guess it's time for my traditionally very late monthly wrap up. So I guess I'm just giving up all pretense of getting these videos done vaguely on time. I do genuinely have a good excuse this time though. The last 2 weeks were the end of my uni semester, so I ended up having 3 gigantic papers due, which when you added them all up were worth about 110% of my grade spread across a couple of different subjects. Yeah, so it turns out that's really unpleasant. Good work me leaving them until the very last minute. But now, with the exception of a couple of days of prac, I'm completely free until July 26th. So I'm hoping that all that wonderful, beautiful free time will make up for the absolute dismal reading month I had in May. Because I had a really slow reading month in May and because this video is so late, I'm also going to talk about what I've read so far in June. It was a really weird reading month for me in May. I read practically nothing for the first 3 weeks. I didn't even finish my first book until the 17th of May, and that was The Great Gatsby, which is tiny and which I'd already started reading before the start of May. I just had zero concentration this month, so I guess in a way Gatsby was a pretty good choice. I've already read it a couple of times, so I'm already familiar with the plot, and I could just sit down on the train and read a couple of pages each day without getting too lost. It's no guarded secret that I absolutely adore this book. I'm not going to pretend that it's perfect, and I think it's often a little bit misunderstood, even by some of those people who champion it. But there are a couple of pages in this where the prose is just so faultless and so beautiful, it leaves me a little bit breathless. The last 2 pages of this book make me tear up every single time I read it, not just because of the meaning, but it's executed so perfectly. I think it's just wonderful. I think it really shows that this book was born out of experience and love and jealousy, and I think it's one of those books that you get something new out of every single time that you read it. I know a lot of people read this one and absolutely hate it, or they don't understand the hype behind it, but for me, it's one of my all-time favourites, which is probably why I didn't enjoy the movie, which was kind of disappointing, but in a way it's nice to know that I love this book so much that it's unlikely a movie is ever going to live up to it. So after that really slow start to the month, I read about 50 pages of 4 or 5 different books, but I really couldn't get into anything. But I finally got into the swing of things and I was able to read 3 books in the last 3 or 4 days of the month, which just felt so nice. After weeks of looking at my shelf and finding absolutely nothing that I wanted to read, and trying a bunch of different books and not finding anything that really grabbed me, it felt really nice to find a book that made me really excited to read again, and that book was Delirium by Lauren Oliver. I probably don't need to explain this one because I feel like it's one of the most popular YA dystopian series out there. It centres on the character of Lena, who's born into a dystopian society where love is considered a contagious disease and is outlawed. Honestly, this book wasn't perfect. I thought Lena was an absolutely boring, vanilla, flat character and a really irritating narrator who showed absolutely no ability to use her own brain for the vast majority of the book. And I was really much more interested in the character of Hannah, who is her best friend. I also thought the plot was pretty boring for the most part. I kept expecting it to kick off dramatically, and that didn't really happen until the very, very end of the book. But Lauren Oliver really has this really powerful command of words, and some of the descriptions in here were just absolutely gorgeous. I had a similar experience with Pandemonium, the second book in the trilogy, which I read directly after Delirium. In Pandemonium, Lena grew on me a little bit more because she actually developed as a character, and she didn't just feel like a blank spot for the reader to insert themselves into the story, which is definitely what Lena felt like in Delirium for me. And apart from Julian's colour-changing eyes, which has to be some sort of magic, I really did enjoy the descriptions in this one as well. I'm not too sure how I feel about the overall structure of Pandemonium though. It's written in this alternating chapter sequence, now and then occurs directly after the events of Delirium, and now is a couple of months after that. The juxtaposition between those 2 different periods of time really allowed you to see the character development that had occurred with Lena over that period of a couple of months, but sometimes that format spoiled the book in a way that seemed completely ridiculous. So without spoiling anything, there's an event that happens in the then storyline, and you wonder if a certain character is going to survive or not, but then you know that they do because they're already mentioned in the now storyline, which happens a couple of months later. And because one of the major themes of the book is survival and a lot of the plot hinges on not knowing whether someone's going to live or die, that kind of ruined some of the story for me. Just little bits like that really made the book frustrating to read. But it really is an addictive series. I'm about 1/3 of the way through Requiem so far, and while I'm a little bit frustrated with the way Lena's character is being handled again because it feels like regression after all that development we had in Pandemonium, I think I'm going to race through to finish it. The last book that I read in May was a graphic novel. It was Ghost World by Daniel Close. This is obviously a really quick read, so I was able to squeeze it in on the last day of the month. But I have to say, I really didn't enjoy it as much as I was hoping to. Ghost World is about these two pseudo-intellectual, sarcastic teenagers and the relationships they have with the people in their small town. In the film, which I actually watched before I read this one, Enid and Rebecca have this veneer of being these shallow and pessimistic characters who have almost a blanket hatred of everything. But then you get to see past that veneer and you really get to see that there's much more to their characters. In the graphic novel, I feel that the only thing that was presented was their veneer and there was nothing shown that was anything deeper than that. There was maybe a couple of attempts to in a couple of the pages, but I think that relied on you having sympathy for the characters, and the way they're presented in the graphic novel, they're so uniformly horrible that it's really hard to have any sympathy for them at all. So this was a little bit disappointing, but I would still highly recommend the film if you like those sort of offbeat, quirky characters who are actually likeable. So those were the 4 books that I read in May, and so far in June I've read another 2. The first one is a YA novel, which if you watched my May book haul, you know I was pretty excited about. Yeah, that was a mistake to have high expectations. It's Be More Chill by Ned Vizzini. I hated this book. I promise I don't say that very often at all, but I can say without a doubt this is the worst book I've ever read, and it's my new least favourite book. Aw, the sun came out. That's gonna go away soon. I hate you, winter. So the plot of Be More Chill is pretty solid. It's about Jeremy, who's this really dorky high schooler who ingests this little supercomputer which trains him on how to be cool. So from that setup, you would imagine that he learns this important lesson about how friendship can't be manufactured and how coolness is sort of relative. No, nothing like that at all. There is no message to this book. There is no moral to this book. There's barely a story to this book. What there is a lot of really disturbing objectification of women and girls. This is clearly aimed at male teenagers, but I think if you're a YA author, you're in a position of really great power. I understand that it's kind of the job of the YA author to represent what happens in that teenage age group, but I think when you put that in this format, it comes off as condoning the behaviour rather than connecting to the audience. I just found it really unnecessary and potentially really harmful to send this message to teenage boys, that those thoughts you're having, that's completely fine. Don't bother connecting to them on an emotional level, just look at how pretty they are. I was just extremely disappointed with this book, and I don't think I'm going to be risking another Ned Vizzini because all the rest of them are rated even lower than this one is. Really sorry for the lighting changes, by the way, but it was pouring down with rain before, and then the sun came out, and now the sun is setting, and I got no control over that. And the second book that I read in June was called Evil Wives by John Marlowe, and I don't have that one because I've already lent it to a friend. This was a true crime book, which is basically just a collection of a bunch of case studies, maybe 20 or 30, about the most famous female murderers through history. I am the biggest wuss ever for reading horror. It's like I just can't do it at all. But for some reason I find true crime less scary than that, and I find it genuinely pretty interesting, so I really enjoyed this one. I think I paid about $3 for this one from some discount store, so for that price it was pretty awesome. So those are the 6 books that I've read since the start of May. I think that rather than doing another wrap up at the end of June, because let's be honest, it would probably be more than a week late anyway, what I'm actually just going to do is do one at the end of July, which is in like 6 weeks time. Those are the 6 weeks of my winter break, so I'm hoping to get quite a lot of reading done in this time, so that would be a nice little wrap up of all my holiday reading. And then after that, fingers crossed, I can get back into the swing of doing monthly wrap ups. I've also decided that I'm not going to set a solid TBR for my winter break. Because I had such a miserable reading month in May, I think having a little bit of flexibility and just reading whatever I feel like reading is probably going to be more fun for me. I'm probably going to finish Requiem by Lauren Oliver, and I'm probably going to read Attachments by Rainbow Rowell in that time. I'm probably also going to do a reread of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick because I love that book. But apart from that, I think I'm just going to read whatever strikes my mood at the time, and hopefully I'll have fun reading in this break. Alright, that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.